welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Gugulethu Cele. In studio with me, I'm joined by both Joe Cimino, who's a director at Financial Fitness Training, together with Jim Millar, who's the Group Managing Director of Financial Fitness Training. Now, this is as we try to debunk some of the myths that we have in our approach to financial fitness in South Africa, and perhaps look at alternative models that we need to implement, but more importantly, what it means for you and I as consumers and savers in this local economy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to this very vibrant discussion. And the both of you have been very affirmative in saying that perhaps our approach and stance to money and our understanding of it is slightly skewed. Tell us firstly what you believe some of the concerns are in the way of achieving financial fitness in a country like South Africa.
Well, first, a lot of times what I hear is the people, the youngsters that are coming out of college and the ones who go straight into work, they're not really getting a proper financial education anywhere. Mm-hmm. They're learning from their parents. And when you look at the statistics, like 95 or 96% of South Africans aren't going to have enough money when they retire. Well, what are they learning? And who are they learning from, and how are they applying it? So they're learning by maybe almost default, and it doesn't seem to be working because there's so many different messages out there that they're being, buy now, pay later. We want it now. Mm-hmm. We're consumers.
Precisely, and that's exactly what leads the growth of the South African economy. But what about those who say that we try to give them exposure to certified financial planners and advisors, although they also come with some of their concerns, because the conception, or rather the misconception in the industry, is that these are just product pushers. So what's your take on that?
Well, most financial planners will not really be very interested in you if you've got a lot of debt, because your debt's actually stopping you from saving. Our central thesis is that you need to get rid of debt before you can really start benefiting from flexible saving, flexible investing. Most people who join a big corporate will join a company group pension, so they'll get that. But the culture of borrowing to buy a car, borrowing to buy everything, basically stops people from benefiting from their savings, because they're paying anything from 12 to 24% on debt, while they're making potentially 12 or 15% on their investments. They're not really getting ahead. So we have to make it very clear that the first thing you've got to do is eliminate debt before you start really benefiting from your investments.
How do we manage this mindset change, especially in a country like South Africa, where the macroeconomic conditions might not be suited to this? And perhaps we can use July, which is National Savings Month, and everyone talks about save, 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 but are we even saving? And when we do save, are we saving in the right products and right models? And are we saving for the right objectives too?
Well, it's a little bit about what you said earlier about, I hear all the time the banter, find a qualified financial advisor. Well, how do you go about that? I mean, I remember seeing an article from with the FSB saying about 41% of financial advisors are not properly qualified. And that's an article from about 2012. That's probably changed, but there are a lot of product pushers out there, and a lot of them have been chased out of the market as well. But it goes back to the consumerism that keeping up with the Joneses, the Motsepis, and the Naidus. That's what I teach, and everybody wants it now, and so they're holding so much debt, and their debt interest is at a higher rate than usually what they're saving. And once Jim didn't add inflation in there. Once you add inflation, I know the government says inflation's 6%, but I think it doesn't cover things like food, petrol, and electricity. So it could be up somewhere around 9%. So when you throw your negative interest rate plus inflation, you're going backwards at a steady pace. You have to outperform that with savings, and it's what Jim said. First, eliminate your debt, then go after the savings.
Exactly.
Now, one of the new things that's come out, which is a good thing, is a tax-free savings account. But the vast majority of people who have opened a tax-free savings account have done it with their bank, and they're saving the money into a money market fund, a fixed deposit type structure, which potentially is giving them 6% per annum. If there are some fees against that account, that's reducing the benefit, but 6% per annum is not beating inflation. If young people are starting a tax-free savings account, they should be going into dynamic performance investments, equity funds, property funds, those kinds of things that have outperformed inflation over the long term. Because there's no point in having a tax-free savings account if you're not going to keep it for the long term.
Precisely. I want us to take advantage of the fact that, in case the viewers haven't noticed, but both of you have interesting assets, both from Ireland as well as the US, and you both come with this international experience where perhaps there are models that we can copy and paste or learn from and perhaps retweak to implement in the South African perspective. What's your take on it? Are there models that we can learn from, like countries from Singapore? As you mentioned, we've got the tax-free savings accounts, but how do we make them work for South Africans?
Well, some of the new thinking that's coming through is that you do have to, in a lot of countries in the world, people have to understand how to build their own asset base. One of the key asset bases in most of the world has been owning your own home. Now, if you purchase a home over a 20-year period, it costs you 2.5 to 3 times the price to purchase that home. If you pay it off in 7 years, you know, it might cost you 1.5, 1 3/4 what you really paid for it. So in other words, the interest charges on a long-term bond are enormous. And if we were to ask the banks to give us a 7-year bond, they won't give it to you. You have to take a 20-year bond, but you can pay it off in 7 years if you wish.
But you need that financial discipline that you were talking about,
correct.
Right? Not keeping up with the 90s and the Mutsipes and the Joneses.
Yeah.
Yeah, but once you start talking about purchasing a house, you know, a lot of people, they go at it backwards because they've already got the store account, then they get the credit card. You know, it's the old, you can't get credit if you don't have credit. And then they get the car loan, and then they get the home bond. Now they got to furnish the house, and here comes the furniture loans, and now they're tied up in knots and they can't do anything about it. So you got to interact them earlier in life and tell them these credit cards, you got to take them out of your wallet. You know, one of the things I joke about in the workshops we do for the corporates is, you know, they use the word swipe.
Yes.
Well, I remember when I was young, swipe used to mean steal. Did you swipe that from the shops?
Oh.
Well, maybe they're swiping from your account now, huh?
Goodness, exactly. And that goes into the point that I wanted to raise, is that what are you doing differently from a financial fitness training perspective? I understand that there's a lot of positive feedback that we've heard from some of your clients, but give us some of the tips that we can implement. The first one that you naturally alluded to, Jim, was getting rid of debt. Be debt free, and that's the starting base.
Well,
right?
if you want to sort of summarize that into a buzz, you could say make debt short term and make investing long term. You know, people do it the other way around. People have long-term debt. They have credit cards that revolve and revolve and revolve, but they put money away into an investment. And next year, when they see that new car, they take the money out and buy the car. You know, so we have a very long-term view on how much. In other words, people seem to think they're going to have debt for their whole life, but they don't seem to believe that they should have investments for their whole life. Again, going back to the tax-free savings account, if you are looking at that as a long-term investment, you should be going into the so-called most risky assets. But if you hold an equity portfolio for more than 7 years, the risk in that portfolio is the same as holding a money market account. So it reduces over a 7-year period. And young people are not taught that at school. You know, we're somehow taught lots of things that we'll never have any use for.
Like the circumference of a circus, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I drive past the media college
indeed.
in Parkmore, and I see these young students with the bling of note. They don't even have a job.
Precisely.
So I can imagine when they get out there and they go, we're going to pay 8,000 Rand. My shoes are 2,000. You're going to pay me 8? I'm waiting for that to come, you know.
So how do we adapt? And I'm glad that you bring up the young individuals, because we all know how we love the German sedans and the big houses and the bling and the lifestyle of traveling across the globe. But are there ways in which you can indulge in some of these little luxuries while still making sure that your long-term financial plan is intact?
Yes, you could buy a 5-year-old German car.
That's a good plan, Jim.
Yeah. So one of my vehicles is 13 years old and it still looks like new.
Wow.
So there are a lot of things you can do slightly differently, still have the lifestyle, but not spend even half of the money to achieve it. And so we've all been sort of conditioned into thinking that if we don't have the latest model, it's not good. But in actual fact, cars, especially in Gauteng, cars last forever. So you can drive an older car and still have all the luxury and comfort. And you know, many things like that. When you buy a home, you should stay in that home for as long as possible, because the longer you stay in that home and you pay it off quickly, the more value it will give back to your asset base, building assets so that you become financially independent someday. So it's there's just numerous differences between the way people do things and the way they should do things that would make them financially independent in the future.
The biggest problem I see while I'm training is the credit cards and the store accounts. You know, I ask people, when you got your cards, you're going to pay them off at the end of the month, right? Yes. How many of you pay all your credit cards off in full at the end of the month? And I very seldom ever get a hand. Goodness. And I go, that is the root of the evil right there, because and that's the highest interest rate. And I also believe some of the credit cards, they used to charge 5% minimum payment, and some of them went down to 2.5% now. So they're getting you for a longer period with a lower minimum payment, because that's what most South Africans are doing. They're paying all the bills and living on what's left, and I like to call that worst case scenario. Because as interest rates go up, and they probably will, that it's just going to tighten them down harder and harder and harder, and they don't see that coming yet, you know.
Exactly.
Until it hits the fan, they're unaware of it.
We focused in the conversation quite a lot on younger people, and just before we start wrapping up, what about my mother, who's going to be turning 60 next year and is planning for retirement and perhaps has done everything according to the book, but still has significant concerns about the credit card that she occasionally indulges in?
Well, she'll have to stop.
Strict rules, clearly.
No, it's she would most probably be more prepared to listen, and therefore a good financial advisor would probably be able to sort out any inefficiencies that she's let creep into her life fairly quickly, in order to prepare her for that retirement lifestyle that she's obviously should deserve to have and should be able to have if she's been saving for the last 40 years.
We have a course called Retiring Financially Fit, and we used to train the 50-year-olds plus, and we found out even with the proper care, they still didn't have enough time, so we backed it up to 45, and a lot of people, and I'm 55, I know I don't look it, I moisturize, but
of course not.
A lot of people wake up in their 50s and they don't realize. So I like to tell them, do you know how many paychecks you have left?
Ooh, how many?
Because nobody thinks about that. Well, from 55 to 60, it's 5 years. 5 times 12, 60 paychecks. You start thinking about how many you got left, you start worrying, what are you doing with your money?
A powerful note to leave it on, gentlemen. I look forward to having this conversation again. But top 3 things that we need to bear in mind from the both of you, very quickly, within a minute. What do our viewers need to go away with knowing this evening? Jim?
Well, one, young people should start a tax-free savings account with an investment institution and put that money into the investments that have given the highest return over the last 20, 30, 50 years.
Fantastic.
I think with the credit cards, people need to put a sustainable limit on there. I mean, 5,000 or 10,000. I mean, they just keep calling you going.
With banks giving you even more
well,
than
that's
that?
you know, sometimes you got to learn to hang up, you know, because they want to get you deeper and deeper and deeper. I remember before the National Credit Act, they raised mine quite substantially because I'm such a great payer. I mean, I paid off in full every month. So, and it went up substantially. So you need to curtail that, and if you can, take the credit cards out of your wallet. When is the last time you went to a till and they gave you something and you looked at your money and you said, put that back, put that back? That's been a long time for a lot of people.
Exactly.
Take the credit cards out of your wallet.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, giving us significant lessons that I might also have to apply within my personal budget, but we appreciate your feedback nonetheless. That's how we wrap it up for Personal Finance this evening. We'll have a fantastic conversation with Joe Cimino, who is a director at Financial Fitness Training, as well as Jim Millar, who's the Group Managing Director of Financial Fitness Training. Now, we certainly want to hear your feedback following this evening's conversation. Are you keen and quite ready to cut up that credit card yet? And if you have, send us your feedback on the impact that this has had on your financial well-being. Send us your tweets at CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410 or to myself at Gugulethu Cele. Until next time, have a wonderful evening.